Hello again, this is Dolores Cannon with the Metaphysical Hour. I'm back again live again tonight. I'm going to be live until I start traveling again in February anyway. So many of you have said you were listening to the shows that they ran out of the archives, which is good, but every once in a while they like to have me back in person anyway. And I haven't been booking any guests lately while I've been trying to get caught up. But I will start having guests again, so I'm just going to be doing talking, but I'm always telling about some of the books that I haven't spoke about before. But first, let me give you out the toll-free number if anybody wants to call in tonight. The toll-free number is 877-876-5227. 877-876-5227 is in case anybody does want to call in and ask questions. I enjoy the callers whenever they do call in. Some people say they don't want to call because they just want to listen, which is okay too. But if you do decide to call in, then we'll see what we can work out. All right. Well, I want to tell everybody I've really been burning the midnight oil. I've been trying to get Convoluted 3 to the printers, and we have to get it done by this weekend. Many of you out there have already placed the pre-orders for the book, and we keep getting calls saying, when's it coming out? When's it coming out? Even in Australia, they want to know when that third book was coming out. And I took the manuscript with me, and I worked on it the whole time I was gone. So we're just doing the final galley proofing now, and it'll go to print. Hopefully, we're going to be sending it off tomorrow. And that's what we're really aiming for, because I've got to have it by the time I go to the Laughlin conference in February. So we're pushing for that anyway. Now, I've got a huge stack of orders already. I think we could very easily sell out the first printing in just a few months. There's that many people have already pre-ordered. But once we go to print, then you won't be able to get the pre-order special. It'll have to be the full price by that time. The order was just before it was printed, and that was what everybody was doing. So, anyway, it's almost there, and I will be traveling again the middle of February, and that's when I want to try to have the book ready so I can take it with me to the Laughlin conference. That's the Laughlin, Nevada UFO conference, and I've been speaking there just about every year. I'm going to see if I can have Bob Brown on here again as a guest before the conference so he can tell you more about the other speakers that'll be there. I had him last year, but that was right at the time that his wife Terry was in the hospital, and there was going under a lot of upheaval with the conference that was going on at the same time that she was in the hospital, and a lot of people know that she did die during the conference, so there was a lot of things happening at the same time. But I'm going to see if I can get him on the show again next month before the conference anyway. But I don't have the dates in front of me, but I believe it's the middle of February. I go out to L.A., and I'm going to be doing a class out there. Anybody that's interested in taking one of my hypnosis classes, that's going to be the first one for 2008, and it's going to be in L.A., and I'm not sure. They were talking about trying to have it out around the airport somewhere, out by LAX, because they thought it would be a lot easier for people to get to if they were flying in or how they were going to get there. Right now, we're still trying to work out the venue. But if you're interested in the class, we keep the class small so that we can have interaction and feedback and communication. And the class is where I teach my method of hypnosis and tell people, how they can also contact the subconscious that I work with so they can help the same information and the same help that I'm getting, because we're able to have instantaneous healings of people, and I've seen real miracles happen when I'm using this technique. And my students are telling me now they're having the same results. and I'm teaching it all over the world. But the class is going to be in LA, and if you're interested in that, you can either contact my office or you can watch our website, and we're going to have the particulars on there. Usually the people who put this on ask us to go ahead and take the people signing up, and they just go ahead and arrange the venue and get all that together, and then we take care of signing up people and all the records. But if you want to check my website, it's www.ozarkmountain, that's OZARKMT.com, the abbreviation for mountain. Or if you're overseas, it's OZARKMT.com. And look under schedules, and you'll see all of my talks and everything for the coming year. And we have got a lot of them booking already. And it'll have in there about the class, and we'll put more information in as soon as we get the venue. But if you want to sign up, the class is a 3-day class, and it's $500, and it's all day. It's 9 to 5, and we do break for lunch, and it's Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. It's 3 days that we have the class, and people say they really learn a lot from it. But if you're interested in it, we only ask that you give a $100 deposit, and then you can pay the rest whenever you get to the class. That's going to be in Los Angeles around the middle of February. The dates are on the website. The next class after that is going to be in March, and that'll be here in Arkansas. So some people are already signing up for that one. And I have other classes coming up, and I've had people call today. Someone wants to do one in Hawaii. So I'm still going to be doing them everywhere. And by the end of the year, I'm going to be going to China and to Japan and those areas. So they're wanting me to probably do something over there, and they're also wanting me to go back to Australia. So there's a whole lot going to be going on this year. And I'm going to try to get to Europe, too, so that I can do some more work over there. There's several countries that want me to return there. So anyway, if anyone is interested in the classes, check the website and see more about the venues and where it's going to be, or you can call our office and find out more information about it, and let us know if you're interested in putting a deposit down for the class. Our number for the office is toll free. It's 1-800-935-0045. 1-800-935-0045 if you're interested in the classes. And after I do the class in LA, I'm also going to be filming for a documentary while I'm out there. And then I'll go on to Laughlin, Nevada for the UFO conference in Laughlin. So I've got to get this book out. So I've really been burning the midnight oil trying to get it finished. And I told my daughter, who works for me in the office, I said, don't be surprised if I go into postpartum depression. Because to me it's like birthing a baby. And every time I finish a book and get it done and finally get it out there, I do get depressed, because it's been so much work has gone into the creation of it, and then to finally release it and let it go and out into the world and see what it's going to do. And it really is just like having a baby. And you do go into depression for a while. So I said, don't be surprised if I do that. Of course, my answer is always to turn around and write another book. But Convoluted 3 is probably going to be the biggest one I've done so far. We thought it was going to be about the same size as Convoluted 1 or Convoluted 2. Convoluted 2 was about 650 pages. So far, this one is about 720. And we were trying to get it down smaller, but I don't know. It seems I've taken everything out that I can. This happens every time I do one of these books. There's so much material. that I just took a lot out and put it over to the side, said it'll be for another book. And that's what's happened. I think I pulled everything out that I can, so we're going to have to stick with the size it is right now. But it is a big book. And as you know, it's got a lot more mind-bending concepts and theories. My books are designed to make people think, so there's a lot in there. So if you're interested in that or the classes or anything, you can call our office or check on our website. Okay. So now I guess I'm going to be thinking about what I'm going to talk about tonight. I don't have a guest tonight. It's just you and me, kids. And I'm so used to lecturing that I can always find something to talk about. But I've been trying to talk about some of my books that I've not mentioned before. And I have so many, there's a lot of material that I haven't even brought up. Now, a few weeks ago, I think it was way back before Christmas, I was talking about the story of the seeding of the planet Earth and how it was seeded from outer space and how they came under direction, and this happened way, way back in time, and they came to plant the seeds that started the life on Earth in the cellular stage, and then as it developed into the other stages of life. And it was a very coordinated thing that happened. And I think it's a very fascinating story because they said this is the way life has begun all over the universes, that they've always come and started it whenever the planet reached the point that it could support life. It's a very momentous and important time whenever the Earth finally reaches a point when it's cooled down enough and all of the conditions are right with the chemicals, the primeval soup, as it's called, to where life can begin. That's a very important time in the history of a planet. So this has happened everywhere, and it will continue to happen. And as I've said before, eventually we're going to be doing the same thing. Because, you know, with our curiosity, when we start traveling further out into space, if we see a planet that is barren, we'll probably come up with the same idea of, well, I wonder what will grow here because of our curiosity. This is what's been happening for so long that it's in time immeasurable. There's no way you can even go back and say how long it is. But I went in when I was doing the talk back before Christmas, I went into all the parts and how it all happened, and the parts that the ETs, UFOs, all of them are very actively involved in all of this. I do not see anything dealing with the ETs as negative. I've never found negativity. It's always been positive. And I think you know from my books about my research into this, I've been finding the reasons why these things are happening. And to me, that's the most important thing of all, is to get rid of the misunderstanding, the fear that surrounds all of this. Because when you have the fear, you can't understand the real truth behind it all. And they are on a mission that has been orchestrated and programmed for so long that we don't even have a hint of how big it is. And for us to react with fear with things we don't understand is just really ludicrous. But I went through the whole story of that. But I found out there was a lot of other things going on too, and I've written books on those. So I wanted to go into some of those stories tonight, what I found. There were other ways life happened on Earth. That was the way the original life began, and was supposed to continue on as the way it was. But there were a lot of other things that would happen along the way that were not intended, because there were many times ETs, aliens, whatever you want to call them, they're just beings, just people in another body, another suit of clothes, as I call it, wearing a different costume. But there were many of them that came here by accident and interbred. So it wasn't all planned that it was just going to be this one species. There's been a lot of other things, a lot of bumps and twists and turns along the way. But the one I want to talk about tonight is my book that's called The Legend of Starcrash. I have 14 books out there, so there's a lot of these you haven't heard about. But The Legend of Starcrash is one of my favorites. And I did that, I'm trying to think how many years ago it was written. This was in the days that I said I was working on history and accumulating knowledge, which I dearly love when I did all the research. When I was doing that kind of work before I got into the metaphysical concepts that are producing the Convoluted Universe books. The Legend of Starcrash was an individual case that I did with a young woman. This woman, she just happened to be a very excellent subject. She has also been featured in the Nostradamus series, so you can see how good a subject she was. She's able to totally get out of her conscious mind altogether. The main thing of doing all this work is to go directly to the subconscious mind, go directly to the past lives that they are living, and at that time they become the other personality totally. And this life no longer exists. And when they wake up, they have absolutely no memory of anything they have said. They think they've just taken a nap. They have no way of knowing how long that time has gone. Now, in these early days, I think last week I talked about the book about Hiroshima. I would spend many sessions with somebody to get the whole story. Today, I don't do that because I'm involved in my other work. If it happens again, I'll probably pursue it. And I have many other books and information, books to be written about these historical cases. But this girl was a college student, and she was majoring in music. And she was a professional organist, a concert organist, and her main interest was in music and wanted to become masters in the musical program. And she liked working with me. She never did know what was going on. She would say after the session, well, where did we go today? What did we do today? So in this story, The Legend of Starcrash tells the story of how one group, if you want to call them ETs, you can, how they happened to be stranded here by accident, and how it led to the development of some of the Indian races on the North American continent. Now, this material, I spent 3 years researching it after I completed all of the sessions, because I wanted to see if there was any way this story coordinated with the legends of the Indians. And by 3 years of researching, I found a lot of very fascinating information, and I think it definitely did correspond and come down to us in the form of legends. One thing you got to remember, I tried to see if I could find the legends before the coming of the missionaries, the old Indian legends, because most of you know that whenever the Catholic Church came into the United States with their missionaries and building their the churches, especially all the ones up and down the California coast, all of these things, when they did that, they especially tried to stamp out, I guess you would say, all of the traditions, legends, and histories of the Indian tribes. They wanted nothing but the Christian version to be all that was told. So a lot of the Indian legends, the wise men were killed, the shamans were killed, and everything was destroyed that had anything to do with the history of the Indian tribes. And they said, now you will only be connected to the Christian beliefs. So the only way it was passed on was in secret with oral traditions, telling the stories in secret. So some of it has survived, and some of it has been written about as it's come down through this way, passing it down father to son orally. And sometimes when that happens, a lot is lost in translation. But this is the way the history has been passed down. And for a long time, a lot of it wasn't talked about because of the fear that they would be killed if they were, doing the traditional things. So that's why a great deal of history has been lost because of their misguided beliefs that they had to destroy everything that was not, relating to the Bible. But to me, it seems so strange because in every culture in the world, they have the legends of the flood. And I think that would verify what the Bible was trying to say. The Indian legends have the legends of the floods. Instead of an ark, they have them on a raft. But what's the difference? It's the same legend, and it shows that something definitely happened at that time period. But the Christian church did not see it as verifying the Bible. So that's why they had to destroy all of these histories and stories. But anyway, I spent 3 years researching all of this, and I found a lot of very interesting things. This story takes place in the Alaska-Canadian region. And one time I had to go to Alaska to lecture up in Fairbanks, and I lectured at a bookstore, and we had lots of Eskimos that came, and I talked about this book, and they got so excited because they said, this is the story of our people. And that made me feel so good because it verified that this was a legend that had a basis in truth, probably been passed down with the Eskimos orally too, in that way. All right. Now, in the story, this girl that I was regressing went back to the time where she was a hunter. The story of Toon, the hunter. And he was living in that area. This was way, way back. Now, this was back before the coming of the Eskimos, is when all of this took place, when there were only Aborigines in that part of the world. Now, Toon was a hunter, and they lived in a small village, and it was in a valley by a river with huge mountains all around. And they thought they were the only people in the world because they had never come across any other people. They had never seen any other tribes or anything. It was just their people living in this valley. So they thought they were the only people in the world. And I think that's the reason why the legend stayed so pure for so long. But as the story came out, the hunter was talking about his life. He was the one who did the hunting for the village. Everyone in the village had their own talents, and they all took care of each other. And it was like one great big family. And he was the hunter, and he would supply the meat. He went further away than some of the other local people would. But he said in all of his travels, he never saw any other people. So they thought they were the only people in the world. Well, as he began telling the story of him and his people, he started talking about the legends of the tribe. And he said at night, sometimes on special days, occasions, the wise men would gather everybody together around the fires, and they would tell the stories, the legends. And he said the legends were so long that it could take many, many nights to go through the entire story. But so on different occasions, they would tell just parts of the story, of the history. And it turned out to be the history of their people. And they had tried to keep it alive the best way they could by repeating the oral story over and over again. So he began telling me some of the story of the legend of their people. And I knew from the beginning this was not a normal legend of Indians. This one had a lot of other undertones, but he told it in the simple way that he knew. He had no idea what he was really saying. He was just repeating what he had been told about the old ones who had come across the void in a metal ship. and they had crashed in that valley. And he had no way. He said metal ships would be very inconvenient. It would be very heavy. And he was thinking of a regular ship, like they had canoes and things like that. So he had no idea of what he was really saying. And across the void, he had no idea what he was talking about. But he began to tell me the story of the people, of the old ones. And I kept encouraging him to tell me more. And he kept saying, you don't know these stories? Everybody knows the stories. Even the children know the stories. So I wanted him to tell me, bit by bit, what the story was. And it all came out in little pieces. And at the very end, then, after he had died, and I was able to talk to his spirit after he had died and he was on the other side, then he began to fill in, to make it more clear as to what it was really all about. So I'm going to tell it the way the story was, not the legend, because the legend is colored in this beautiful language that he didn't know what he was saying. I'll tell the story that he said happened. In the story, there were 5 ships that came from another planet, and it's hard telling where it was. It could have been in our galaxy, who's to say, but it came from a long, long distance. There were 5 ships, and there was something that had happened on their world, and they could no longer stay there. There were pros and cons about what it was, whether their world was dying and they had to leave, or whether they just wanted to go and colonize a new world, or there was even the story that they had had problems with the government and they had sent them into exile. Whatever it was, there were 5 ships, and the ships were totally contained. They were called multi-generational ships. They would live and die on those ships because they knew once they left they could not return home. And they were supposed to go to find a planet that they could colonize. And it was not supposed to be Earth. They were headed somewhere else that they could live. And they knew exactly where they were going. But it was a multi-generational ship. They had food on board. They grew food. They had plants. They had seeds. They had animals that they were taking to the new world. It really sounded a lot like the story of Noah's Ark. And it makes you wonder if it had some, Noah's Ark story had some basis in these ancient legends, who's to say? But it was a ship that had everything on it that they could possibly need. And they headed out. And they were traveling for who knows how long, because people were born and died on this ship as it went. There were hundreds of people on each one of these 5 ships. And as they went near our solar system, and they were entering into the area here, one of the ships began to malfunction, and it was having problems. And they didn't know what to do about it. They couldn't fix it, so they said they were going to have to land and try to make repairs. And the other 4 were not going to be able to do this. They were going to have to go on. I believe they said they stayed for a while to see if they could help. But when it was going to malfunction, they were studying the solar system to see which would be the best place they could land, where they thought the air and everything would be comparable, where they could live, just long enough to repair the ship and then take off again. At first, they were going to land on the moon. To them, the moon was very fascinating because they had never seen a planet with such a large satellite before. So they thought they could probably live on the moon. It was a good thing they didn't land there. But then they decided to land on the Earth, and they circled the Earth trying to find a place to come down, and the ship just kept malfunctioning until it finally crashed. And it crashed in this area in the Canadian-Alaska region. Later, when I was trying to find out exactly where this could be, it's somewhere around the Yukon River, and believed to be closer to Alaska than it is to Canada, in the Yukon River area. And I've had some people write me saying, let's go and see if we can find the artifacts and the remains there. And I don't know if it would be possible or not, because there were supposed to be some things that did survive. Anyway, the ship crashed, and the other ships circled and waited to see if there was anything they could do, and they said no, they were not going to be able to take off again. So the other ones had to go on because they had their destination. This ship was left behind with all of the inhabitants on it to survive the best way they could. This was a huge problem. These people were described, they were like humanoids, very handsome people, very tall. And on the cover of the book, The Legend of Starcrash, I have what they describe. The skin appeared almost silver because of the oils in their skin. It had a silvery look appearance to it, and they had pure white hair. Very distinctive looking people. Pure white hair and a silver colored skin. Well, when they landed, the sun here was too strong for them. Now, this was back in time, so the radiation of the sun may have even been stronger then than it is now. But it was so strong that they couldn't go out during the day. They had to leave the ship at night and try to make repairs and to get what they needed. Because during the day, it was just too strong. It would hurt their eyes, and they couldn't take the radiation. Then, as they stayed, they lived in the ship for a while. And they soon found out they were not going to be able to survive here very easily. Many of them were killed or hurt whenever the ship crashed. The other ones, they were trying to survive. They found they were not able to reproduce, that the radiation was so strong. Many of the people began dying from the effects of the radiation. And then other ones, when the children were born, they were either born with defects or born dead. So the radiation was just not compatible with their bodies. So they were going to have to find a way to survive. They didn't know how this was going to be. There was only one other group of people living in this valley. And they tried to stay away from them because the other group was very afraid of these silver beings that had fallen from the sky. The other group that was living in the valley were Aborigines. This was long before the coming of the Eskimos. The Eskimos came many, many generations, years, thousands of years later. I don't even know the time period. These were the Aborigines, the original beings in Alaska, in that area. They were dark-skinned, they were short, but these were the only living people. So they made the decision, in order to survive, they were going to have to interbreed with this other species. Maybe that way they could counteract the effects of the radiation of the sun on their bodies, and they would be able to produce viable offspring, because that was the only way they were going to be able to live here. Otherwise, they were going to all die. So they began interbreeding with the Aborigines. And they said they were a very simple people, and they had to communicate with them telepathically. There was no other way. But the Aborigines eventually taught these beings how to hunt, how to gather fruit and vegetables. They taught them a great deal of things about planting, so they were able to finally work in harmony together. And it was said in the beginning, when they first had the offspring, some of the children had red hair or blue hair because of the mixing with the very fair, the white skinned with the dark Aborigines. So they said at first that it was quite comical because of some of the colors at the children's hair when they were born. By the time Toon came along, and was much, much later, many, many generations later, the children had all settled into one certain color, which was a very light-skinned, not as dark as the Eskimos are today, a lighter, a brown, but still lighter than the Eskimos are, and their hair was black, but it was a little different in their features. So anyway, in the beginning, they had to live in the ship. But as they began to be able to live outside, they started building cabins. And they started cannibalizing the ship by taking it apart and using it in the village, piece by piece. And on board the ship, they had gigantic computers. They said they had all of the knowledge of their world was on these computers. And not like the computers we have today, but very different, because Toon described some of the artifacts that the wise man still had in his house, but he had no idea what they were used for. But the artifacts had come from the ship. And after so long, they were just called things that belonged to the old ones. They had no idea what they were used for. But in those computers was all the history of their worlds, of the galaxy, of the travels. Everything was in there. And they knew they were going to have to just take with them what they could. It must have been really difficult to decide, what do we take and what do we leave? What's going to be practical in this new place we're going to be living in? Because they were just very highly advanced things, and they were going to have to come down to living back to normal, like we consider normal, I guess. So it must have been very difficult for them. So they had metals that would never rust and never corrode, so they made their tools out of those. And some of those things did survive down into the time when Toon was telling this. And they said they had made tools out of them, and some of the old ones' tools were still being used because they would never deteriorate. And they said as these people died, they buried many of them in the suits that they wore. And there's a possibility, I guess, that some of these things still remain in that part of the world. They were buried with some of the artifacts, some of the tools. And they said parts of the ship are probably still in that area somewhere. But most of it, they just cannibalized and used it among the people. And they built huts, they built cabins, and they had a community. And down through time, they eventually evolved into these people. But one thing that Toon said I found was interesting was that he said during the time of the old ones, the moon walked a different path. Now, Toon, as a hunter, knew all about the stars, all about the moon, because he used this a lot when he was out in the woods and hunting. And he was very familiar with the skies. So he said he knew the path of the moon in his day and the stars. He was very familiar with all of these things. But he said in the time of the old ones, when the old ones first came, the moon walked a different path. He said in those days, the seasons were very easy to tell because the sun and the moon both had the same amount of days that they traveled through the sky. The seasons were exact. So everything was different. It was very easy to keep track of the time, of the seasons. He said a lot of this knowledge, there was a tremendous amount of knowledge in these legends, but over the generations, some of the wise men had died before they could pass it on. There were catastrophes from time to time. So a lot of the knowledge was lost, and he could only remember what was passed down in the legends. But he said in those original days, the seasons were different. The moon and the sun both walked a different path. And part of the story was, in those developing days, I guess some of the originals may have still been alive, but they saw a huge comet in the sky, and it was coming closer and closer to the Earth. and they'd never seen a comet that big before. And when it finally got close to the Earth, they said they couldn't see it anymore. But right after that, the ground began to shake, and they had tremendous earthquakes, and trees and rocks were falling. It was just very powerful when it happened. And he said for a few days after that, whenever everything quieted down, he said the sun, he said, oh, there was also very tremendous winds at the same time all of this was going on. And it leads you to believe that this comet, meteor, or whatever it was, had probably hit the Earth. Because when all of this happened, he said, the sun reversed itself in the sky and went the opposite direction for so many days. And then it straightened out again to where it went the way it is now. Except that now, he said the moon walked a different path, meaning it had a different orbit, the sun had a different orbit, and they could no longer count the days the way they did before. Before it was absolutely exact every month, and now it was different. So it leads you to the conclusion or the speculation, if this meteor hit the Earth, it must have tilted it on its axis. And there's been many stories and scientific evidence that something did hit the Earth. This was part of what caused the dinosaurs to die, because something definitely happened that changed the climate. And I've also been finding evidence that there was a planet out there that blew up, and when it did, it sent out pieces of itself. This is the one that's in the asteroid belt, that when it blew up, it sent pieces of itself out as comets and meteorites, and they went everywhere. And the information I have been able to find, and this is in the new book, is that it destroyed the atmosphere of Mars. And whenever it blew up, it just sucked the oxygen away, the atmosphere away. And that the Earth was further away on its orbit whenever this explosion happened. Mars, they said, was as close as they could get. So it was devastated, and all life on Mars was destroyed. The atmosphere was destroyed. The water was destroyed, so that life couldn't live there anymore, and it turned into a barren planet. But they said Earth was further away on its orbit, was almost on the other side of the sun, so that it was blasted by meteorites. And this is what has caused, see, Nostradamus mentioned it in my books I wrote about him, the parts on the Earth where you'll see the big craters. Even like the Gulf of Mexico, he said, was one piece of a huge meteorite that hit the Earth. The Sea of Japan, any round depressions are where these pieces hit the Earth. So they must have been really bombarded it. But as the story went, at least the Earth wasn't hit as bad as Mars was. It was bombarded, but it didn't destroy the atmosphere so that people could still live here. And so I'm thinking this could very well have occurred at the same time. But, you know, all over the United States even, we have many craters that were made by meteorites, crater lakes and depressions all over the United States and all over the world. So we do know something definitely happened. And look at all the craters on the moon. It definitely happened from something. And then I was told that a lot of the comets are pieces of these that just got caught in orbit and are still out there wandering around. In fact, Toon called the comets the wandering stars. So something happened at that time that changed everything. And he said it also changed the climate. The climate of that area at that time, whenever they crashed and they interbred with the Aborigines, was more temperate, more like the United States is right now. It was cold, but it had 4 seasons and it was more temperate. After this happened, whenever the Earth, as I presume, tilted on its axis and created the sun going backwards and then returning to natural, and all of this happening, it made the climates different. He said it became colder, and the nights and the days became longer, the way it is today, after it all straightened out again. So we have a totally different climate than it is now. So these are the part of the story of how it all happened. There was a whole lot more to it, and it's all in the story that I wrote. The name of the book is called The Legend of Starcrash. I'm trying to remember some more to it. Because as they developed, at the time of Toon, they still thought they were the only people in the world because they had never seen anybody else. Well, as Toon began, he got older and he had trained another hunter to take his place. He decided he wanted to go out and travel further. Before, he would only stay in the mountains around the valley to get the animals and bring them back for the village. He didn't go too far afield. So he decided, after he was not needed there as much, he was going to go out and travel and see what he could see. So as he went many, many days further than he'd ever gone before, he saw another tribe. And he was afraid to get too close to them because he didn't know anything about them. And these people had a great deal of psychic ability, and he could pick up that this was a totally different group. And he watched them, and they had canoes, and they had a village, but he was afraid to approach them. So when he went back to the village and told the people, we are not the only people in the world, there is other people out there, nobody would believe him. They all laughed at him and said, oh, he's just saying this, he's getting old, because we know there's no one. We're the only people. We are the ones, the only ones. And they would never believe his stories, and they said he would tell the stories to the children at night, but nobody would take him seriously of all the things he had seen. So they went all that time thinking they were the only people in the world. And when Toon finally died, he died in an avalanche when he was out in the woods. He died with nature that he loved anyway. But another thing that was interesting with Toon was that in one part of the story, the old ones brought animals off of the ship. They had the plants. They had a lot of plants that were not native here, and they tried to make things grow. They had the seeds that they brought with them all the way across the void, as he called it. They had the seeds. They had animals, and they tried to get things to grow. Some of them, the plants wouldn't live, and some of them hybrided, and some of them have come down into our time. But the animals, many of those, they used for a while. Some were used like oxen, but they didn't look like any oxen we have today. Because of the radiation, they had trouble breeding the animals and getting them to live. Some of them were sturdy enough that they have come down into our time, and these are listed in the books. Other ones couldn't. They could not survive, and eventually they died. So there was a great deal of interest in trying to keep all this going. But as one interesting part was Toon, on one winter, the people were so hungry and he didn't have any food. He hadn't been able to find anything. And he says he went out to look for food to bring back to the village to find something to kill. And he said everything was very strange that day. The whole air, everything seemed strange. And he found this strange-looking animal, and he killed it and brought it back. And when he came back to the village, the wise man said he had never seen anything like this before. It was like no animal existed at that time. So we asked him to prepare the skull and the hide in a special way, and he used it for the rest of his life in his ceremonies. But they said they ate the food, and it was good food. It didn't poison them. But they had no idea what kind of animal this was. And later, when I got the full story, as I was getting to the subconscious part, it said that what happened was that he had crossed into another dimension. That's why he was an animal that did not exist in this dimension. And he crossed over into the other dimension. That's why everything seemed strange. The air and everything didn't seem quite right, because he went into a parallel world, a parallel dimension, to bring this animal back. They said this was highly unusual, because normally what exists in one dimension cannot be brought back into this dimension without destroying its matrix. And that's why it was so unusual for him to be able to get the animal to bring it back, and they did eat it, and they used the hide and the skull, the horn that was on the skull. It may be because the village was so hungry, this was allowed to happen. Who knows? But he was able to bring it back, and the village did survive. So, by crossing into the other dimension. So there's a whole lot of very strange parts to this whole story. As I said, when I was in Alaska and told the story of the legend of Starcrash and the people, oh yes, what the Eskimos did say this was the stories of their people. But as we went on down through time, it was many, many generations after Toon that finally one day some Eskimos came into the village. They found the people, and they came in. And the people, of course, were very startled because they still thought they were the only people in the world, and here's a whole group of people coming in. So when that happened, then the Eskimos began living there and eventually interbred with these original people. And took a long time, so their legends and the other legends were all blended together eventually. But the story was that this is where some of the Indian tribes, North American Indian tribes, came from. It came down from the north, and they are directly descended from these people. And there was a lot of traits of the old ones that have been passed down through the North American tribes, Indian tribes. And this is what I found when I was doing my research. They said one of the things was the intolerance for alcohol. This was because the old ones, having a different chemistry in their body, that they couldn't tolerate alcohol. And this is why a lot of the Indians can't do it also. Another thing that was different had to do with the blood. Some of the traits in the blood have passed down into the North American Indians. And they are little things with the blood that when the doctors analyze the blood, they say it means it's very, very rare, a rare type or a very, very rare component of the blood. So this can be traced, but look how many eons this has been. But some of these, their blood still flows in the veins of the North American Indians. Another trait that has come down is lupus. He said this is where the body attacks itself, and it all has to do with the sensitivity to radiation, and it's carried over in the genes in the body. And when I did the research, I was amazed to find that lupus is very predominant in some of the North American tribes, Indian tribes. I didn't know that. So that's one of the things that has also come down into our time. These different traits have carried down through the blood, but they are related to these old ones that came from the stars. But they said some good traits that came down was psychic abilities of the old ones in the Indians, and also the ability to be able to see at night, what they call cat's eyes, because the old ones couldn't tolerate the sun and the radiation. And so they had to use this ability to see at night, because that's how they did a lot of their work. They only went out at night. Those are some of the good traits that passed down from the old ones. There's a whole lot more, but that's all I'm remembering at this time, and the clock is saying it's about time to stop. But if you're interested in that book, I said the Eskimos said they have these stories in their own legends. And it's a fascinating story of how some of the North American Indians came to be and what they have passed down from outer space, from other aliens that got trapped here. Many came and couldn't get away. The name of the book is The Legend of Starcrash. All right, now we're going to have to go now. Happy New Year, everybody. I don't know what happened to the last year, but now we're in 2008. So Happy New Year, everybody, and I'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.
If you enjoyed the show, check out more of our other videos, and be sure to subscribe and click the like button. Thank you for listening to the Metaphysical Hour with Dolores Cannon.